Hello, everyone. Let's go around the Big Ten here on January 3rd, 2025. It's a new year. Uh, first recording of the new year. So here we go. What an interesting week-ish, in the postseason. We'll get into the playoff games here in a few minutes, but we haven't really got into the bowl games, the non-playoff bowl games. And there's been some interesting things as it pertains to the Big Ten in those games. So we'll go down the list here and kind of talk about some things. But I guess we'll start off with kind of not a black eye for the Big Ten, but just kind of something that, that went wrong here for the Big Ten, which is the Kansas State-Rutgers game. Rutgers blows now we both picked Kansas State, so we end up backdooring our way into being correct. But a 17-point second half lead just disappeared for Rutgers. That game didn't play out anywhere close, even though, like I said, I picked Kansas State and I thought, that the touchdown spread was about right. That game didn't play out anywhere close to how I thought it would play out. It was super high scoring. Both teams' offenses, just big plays left and right. If you would have told me either team, but Rutgers included, of course, in this being the underdog, would have a 17-point second half lead, I would say, well, that's game. That's definitely game. Like, there's no way either one of those teams is coming back from 17 down in the second half against the other, the way both teams like to run the football, play physical football. So how wild was that game? I mean, that was just totally out of left field for me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said, it's like we did pick Kansas State, but I mean, this is going to be one of these games that I think Greg Schiano is going to be like, I overthought this. I made this complicated when it didn't have to be, because like you said, a 17-point lead in the second half, and Rutgers traditionally likes to run the ball. Now, granted, the fact that Kyle Monangai sat out was kind of one of the things that led you and I to both believe that Kansas State was going to wind up on top. However, neither one of us anticipated a 17-point lead. And you're thinking, all right, that kind of, you've got the lead, you want to burn clock, you want to try and do everything you can to hold on to the lead. And you're, pretty much not a passing team by nature. So for Rutgers, this is going to be one of those things, I think. And let's face it, I mean, it was an entertaining game. It's an exhibition game in the grand scheme of things. But I think Rutgers and Greg Schiano will be kind of like, man, we had that game and we gave it away.
Yeah, and look, Antoine Raymond fills in 113 yards on almost 6.5 yards a carry, 3 touchdowns. So they rush for 164.
Yep.
Almost 400 yards of offense. Actually, I think exactly 401 yards of offense. You would have told me at the beginning, you know what? The guy who fills in for Monangai is going to rush for over 100 yards on over 6 yards a carry, and they're going to have 400 total yards of offense, and they're going to have a 17-point second half lead. I'm like, well, there's no way they're losing that game. But Kansas State rushes for almost 350 yards. The one thing about this game I did get right was that I thought Avery Johnson would make some big plays and kind of be the difference. Well, Avery Johnson had 195 yards passing, but he had 3 touchdown passes. He had 57 yards rushing. He had a touchdown on the ground. So he had 4 touchdowns that he accounted for. And so that was one area I did get right. And then, but Dylan Edwards, almost 200 yards, 10.9 yards a carry, and 2 touchdowns was really the difference. Also had a receiving touchdown. So Dylan Edwards had one of the best performances of the bowl season there for Kansas State. So that's a tough way to end the season for Rutgers, because you weren't expected to win that game, but the way it played out, you should have won it. Like you can't blow 17-point second half leads, and that's going to be kind of an annoying way for them to kind of end their season. They had a pretty good year. I think Greg Schiano's got everything on the right track, But boy, 8-5 with a win over Kansas State in the bowl game looks a lot better than 7-6. It just looks. I know it's only one game better, but it just looks a lot better on the resume. But it happens. Bowl games are wacky, and that one was certainly that. So, another interesting game, Las Vegas Bowl. That was a game that had some kind of twists and turns to it as well. USC beats Texas A&M, and this is going to be a theme here, I think, on this episode. Is, boy, if you were like a big SEC backer this year, you are not having a good time right now.
No, you're not.
You are like USC, lowly USC, and I look, they had some games they blew in the Big Ten this year. They arguably were better than their record. I get that, but USC struggled very, very much in Big Ten play. 2-0 against the SEC. I know Texas A&M had some had some opt-outs, some portal stuff, but like USC got decimated by the portal. Their quarterback's gone. Their stud freshman running back's gone. They've got receivers gone. They've got safeties gone. They've got defensive linemen gone. Like, this was not even close to a full strength USC. And they find a way to beat another team from the SEC who was above 500 in the SEC. Like, these are not bad SEC teams. Or be like LSU and Texas A&M were above 500 SEC programs. This is not them beating Mississippi State. Explain this away, or is it just that simple? Is the SEC just not very good this year in terms of what it usually is?
I think it's the latter. I just think that we have been fed a narrative by ESPN, by the national media about how dominant the SEC is, and I'd be the first one to admit. I mean, year in, year out, over the last 20 some years, the SEC. I mean, the facts speak for themselves when it comes to like the NFL draft results. That by and large, a lot of talent is in the SEC, but this year the results on the field speak for themselves. And I think this is. I'm not saying that the SEC is always going to be in this position, but this is the first year of post Saban, and I think that for all of the SEC chanting that you hear from the SEC fans, let's face it, those coattails of Alabama were pretty much what they were hanging on and clinging to, and Alabama now is, as I realize we're going to talk about how they did in their bowl game here in a little bit. Alabama, I think, will be fine with Kalen DeBoer in the long run, but getting back to the big picture, I think the SEC is down, and Alabama, as well as all these other programs, are trying to kind of find their way in this new world. For Texas A&M, it has to be the way that they lost in the final seconds to a team that struggled, to USC, a team that struggled in the Big Ten. To lose in the final seconds has to leave a very bitter taste heading into the 2025 offseason.
Yeah, we mentioned that on the last episode. Just whoever lost that game was going to have a really, really upset fan base to deal with all offseason. But it was just so hard. I don't know why, but it was, for some people, it was so hard to believe that the SEC just was even if you just want to call it down here. We don't have to make any long-term hot takes about, has NIL and the transfer portal, even things out across the college football. We can get it. We have all off season to kind of talk about that type of stuff, but it was just so hard for people to watch. This is what shocks me about certain stuff right now. We have never, like, the average college football fan has never watched more college football. Mm-hmm. Like, every game's on.
That's right.
If you have one or two streaming services, you can literally watch every college football game every Saturday. And a lot of people do. A lot of people watch all day, 4 or 5 games a day. They'll record games and watch more games like Sunday or Monday. Like, the average college football fan watches more college football than they've ever had at any point. And the takes seem to be getting worse, or the inability to process what you're watching seems to be getting worse. It was so obvious within 5 or 6 weeks of the season that the SEC was not a juggernaut this year. The non-league results in some of the bigger games, the things that we thought, like Georgia comes out and blows Clemson's doors off at the beginning of the year, then we find out, Clemson's, going to be a 3-4 loss team. So, and that was like the signature win. Like you see USC beat LSU on a neutral field. You see like how these teams in the league, like Georgia and Ole Miss, like struggle or lose to teams like Kentucky and Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. And it was just very, very obvious that the top of the SEC was not nearly as good as it used to be, or as it has been in the past, 10, 20 years. But nobody could like just come out and just say it. It was somehow controversial to just say, look, I know what I'm watching right now, and it's just not the same caliber of football I'm used to seeing from Georgia and Alabama and insert top SEC school X. And why was it so hard to like just kind of acknowledge what you were watching?
I just think it's a stubbornness factor. I mean, I just think that there's, and we've talked about it before, that, when it comes to ESPN, the fact that they have a financial interest in the SEC, to promote their brand, that I think that there's just kind of a belief that, okay, well, obviously, the fact that we're showing this, in prime time, considering the fact that, like that is kind of an area that, for better or for worse, Fox has gladly, ceded over the primetime game over to ESPN. And, personally, I can understand why, as an Ohio State fan, why sometimes, you want to have your best game on at night. But getting back to your question, Mark, I think it's just a stubbornness factor that, okay, well, I mean, we are coming up on, almost 20 years of perceived SEC dominance. The fact that, when we start talking about, the college football playoff, that the very real possibility that there will not be an SEC team in the national championship is looming. So, like, how can this possibly be? Like, when you have people on ESPN, like Paul Feinbaum, kind of acknowledging like, hey, the SEC was down this year. Like that had to be some bitter words for him to enunciate and spit out of his mouth.
I just want to throw up the Die Hard meme, like, welcome to the party, pal. Like, thank you, Paul Feinbaum, for acknowledging this on like December 2nd or whenever he finally acknowledged that, I'm sorry, January 2nd when he finally. It's like, okay, where were you like 2 months ago? Because it wasn't more than a couple weeks ago that he was still pounding the SEC drum.
Oh yeah,
they didn't get enough teams in, and all this other nonsense. And just so, like, you talk about having to actually, like, I don't even say get smacked in the face by reality, because you got smacked in the face by reality all season. I don't know. You took a sledgehammer to like your face, I guess, for Paul Feinbaum to finally acknowledge it. But we'll give them their one, though. They did. Missouri beat Iowa by a field goal.
That's right.
The Music City Bowl, that was actually a really good game, one of the better bowl games, back and forth. Both teams had some key opt-outs, but mostly a well-played, interesting football game. Iowa was able to do a few things offensively maybe people didn't think they'd be able to do without Caleb Johnson, especially. But Missouri was able to play the better fourth quarter and take that game. How much do we take away from that one for either team? Is not in terms of, like, obviously it's a good win for Missouri, but like extrapolating that toward next year when we don't even really know what those are, two schools where it's like, what are those rosters going to look like next year? They're losing some really good players. Some of them didn't play that bowl game, but like can we take too much from that other than like, hey, good win, Missouri? Like, is there anything else that we can kind of take from that?
I wouldn't. I mean, that's just me. And I'm not, I realize it's going to sound like I'm, again, congratulations to Missouri for winning the game, but I'm going to look at it like the last few moments of that game, watching it, I shouldn't be surprised because, I mean, he's made a lengthy career of it. Kirk Ferentz coaching decisions that kind of had not just Chip Minnich, but a lot of people on social media that are in the national consciousness, like, what did I just watch here? Like in terms of, punting the ball when you're down with only like a couple minutes left. And then that fourth down call that completely was like, really? Like, that's what you decide to try and win this game with? And again, in the big picture of things, it's not part of the college football playoff. It's more of, all right, like you said, Mark, a lot of opt-outs. This is an opportunity to kind of hopefully, get some backup players in and see what you have for going into 2025. But you always want to win the game. You always want to end the season on a high note. And to your point about what do you take away from it, it was kind of that, yeah, Missouri won that game, but Iowa had Kirk Ferentz had some very puzzling decisions that led to Missouri coming out on the winning edge.
And to your point on Iowa at the end of the game, it's one thing, like, look, do I like Kirk Ferentz's brand of football? No, it's not even like remotely. I can't relate to it. It's not even like remotely similar to how I would manage games. But like, you can kind of like get it. Like, okay, that's like their whole thing. That's their brand. That's their philosophy, whatever. So when you get into these 21-20 games against, Michigan State in the middle of October or something, like that's how you're going to play it. In these bowl games, like, wouldn't these bowl games, or wouldn't they be a great opportunity to like put your guys in positions to like be a little more aggressive on fourth downs, maybe punt less, like practice those situations, get experience in those situations for when you might actually be forced to do it at some point in a game that actually has some meaning. And like, I go back to like, my goodness, Pat Narduzzi kicks an 18-yard field goal in a bowl game, in overtime. What are we doing? Like, it just like, it had some of those vibes to it. And it's just like, really is like, maybe the bonuses for winning the Music City Bowl and the contracts are bigger than I think they are. I don't know. But yeah, I just as a rule and across college football, the coaches who continue to be ultra conservative in a bowl game that doesn't really impact anything, not only are cowards, but they're also like leaving, in my opinion, opportunities out on the table in terms of gaining experience in those types of situations. So it drives me nuts.
Oh, I agree. I think that would be one of the things that I would think going forward, if you are not part of the college football playoff, is this is an opportunity, especially in we talked about this before with not only with opt-outs, but like the transfer portal, that, all right, here's an opportunity for you to, all right, defy convention, for lack of a better word. It's like, here's where, all right, you've got, I'm not saying, throw people out there if they're not prepared, but like, if you have freshmen that, all right, I realize when it comes to like eligibility, but hey, I just mentioned the transfer portal. I don't want to, just let some guy just, leave without, not even seeing what they could possibly do. So it's like, all right, here's an opportunity. You've got this true freshman, I don't know, like true freshman running back or true freshman wide receiver, see what they can do out there. Like like you said, it's like, you don't have to necessarily punt the ball. You want to win the game, but you don't have to, necessarily, like you said, kicking field goals in a let's just say it, like in the grand scheme of things, a meaningless bowl game. It doesn't make sense. Like you want to win the game, but you also want to use it as a learning and building opportunity for the younger players on your roster who have not seen appreciable game experience.
Yeah. Just so, philosophically, I can't relate to the way some of these guys approach these bowl games, but it is what it is. We'll get back to a couple of these other ones, but the Citrus Bowl was wild.
Yes.
Illinois beat South Carolina, kind of another hits keep on coming for the SEC moment. Shane Beamer tries to fist fight, or at least people to think he tried to fist fight Brett Bielema in the middle of the game. Bielema made a gesture at the South Carolina bench, sideline huddle. As Bielema said after the game, all of them, about a perceived breaking of an unwritten rule with the T symbol that you see guys make on the kickoff, which indicates the returner is indicating that it's a touchback, that he's not returning it. Apparently, South Carolina made that gesture and then returned it. Bielema thought it was not only a breaking kind of an unwritten, sportsmanship rule, but also that it was a dangerous thing to do on a play that where there's a lot of collisions. First of all, we'll get into that, but first of all, 1 to 10, 1 being not at all willing, 10 being all the way willing. How willing do you think Shane Beamer really was to get into a fist fight with Brett Bielema there? I think there was some theater being displayed there.
I'm going to give that a 2. I think, like you said, I think there was more than just a little theater. I think that was completely for show. And again, in the grand scheme of things, I mean, it's more of, Mark, as you said, like another, bad look for the SEC. It's like, okay, this is one of those programs that you could hear the whining and how unfair, when the rankings came out and they weren't included in it. And then they went out and again, I want to give credit to Brett Bielema for, I've said it before, I'll say it again, for I think a really under the radar, underrated job this year. I will freely admit, I thought this was a team that when I looked at their schedule prior to the season, and that's why you never know until you play the games, I thought they might get to bowl eligibility. I thought, okay, it's not going to be, for them to win 10 games for the first time since 2001. I mean, that's a tremendous job by Bielema. But yeah, getting back to Beamer and the whole like SEC, oh, this is unfair. And then for them to go out and not win the game. I mean, it was just a bad look overall.
Yeah, it was a wild reaction. He had stuff to say about it afterwards too. I kind of ranted a little bit after the game about it. Illinois was taking advantage of the substitution rules. Like South Carolina would run guys on. Illinois would take their good old time.
Yep.
Matching their substitutions, running the play clock down. I kind of posted this on Twitter at one point. It's like Brett Bielema had Shane Beamer like in hell, like just in hell, in total hell, in a blender, like just had him in hell for 3 hours. It was so clear he was in his head. As someone who kind of loves this, like I love kind of the pro wrestling component of some of this stuff. Like I want more Steve Spurriers in the game. Like we miss the Steve Spurrier stuff. Like, you can't spell Citrus Bowl without UT or just all that. Like, I love the personalities. So like, I was the opposite of Shane Beamer. I was in heaven. I was like, oh, this is fantastic. What else can happen that could make this even better? So I was enjoying myself quite thoroughly watching this, but it was very clear one side was getting in the other's head. But to Bielema's point, actually the actual point there, does Bielema have a point? Like, did Bielema go too far? Does he have a point? Like, where is Bielema here on the scale of like correct versus like, really?
I'm gonna say that. I mean, I'm gonna lean more towards Bielema being correct. Now, does he get up to the edge of more than most when it comes to like relishing, kind of like being like getting in like Beamer's head or any and tweaking the opponent? Absolutely. Does he love to do it? I'll tell you what, Shane Beamer, like you said, for that entire game, it seemed as though like he was more than happy to let Bielema live rent free in his head. And I just think overall, it's like, like the more experienced coaches, I'll just say that the more talented coaches don't play that game. And I think maybe Beamer, if he with some hindsight, the game is still relatively fresh in terms of like when it was played. Maybe with an off season, he'll kind of look back and be like, I probably could have handled things differently.
Yeah, that was classic. Like Bielema, like, let me get in this young guy's head.
Oh,
let me use my experience here, and let me get this guy in a blender, and he was successful.
I mean, Urban Meyer used to do it to Bielema when he was Urban Meyer. That's all. I mean, he didn't have to. I mean, it wasn't even necessarily in like game time. It was just like with recruiting, and that. It's like things that he would do and say, and and it's like, okay, and he was in Bielema's head for like, all right, he didn't care. So it's like, I mean, lesson learned. And I think that's kind of where I mean, it's impossible to be objective, but it's like as much as I try to be, it's like, okay, Beamer, this is where it's like in the off season when you are, hopefully like away from the office after everything is kind of like settled down, you'll be able to be like, okay, next time I see that guy, or next time I play against a team like that or a coach like that, this is what I need to do.
Yeah, I don't think how anything Beamer, how any of Beamer's reactions to things were helpful for his team.
They weren't, not at all.
And that's ultimately got to be like front of mind, is like, what response do I need to have that's going to be most beneficial for my football team? And then you can say whatever you want when the game's over. Like, you can let loose or whatever you want to do after the game, the press conference.
Right.
But like in the heat of the moment, like that, I don't think any of that was helpful for his team.
Exactly.
So, all right. Pinstripe Bowl, Nebraska. Nice little end of their season. What can we expect out of them next year? They've done a good job in the portal. They've lost a couple guys that surprised me a little bit, but they've done a good job in the portal so far. I'm sure they'll continue to work that. They have some young talent on the roster. Obviously, Dylan Raiola is going to be a big part of things moving forward for them, and his development will determine a lot of like kind of the direction of their program. But I thought it was good symbolism in terms of like where they're headed. I think they're going in the right direction.
Oh, definitely going in the right direction. And to your point about, well, what can we expect when you look at next year for Nebraska? They open up actually, I guess you could say it's like a neutral site game on Thursday, August 28th against Cincinnati, and then Akron, and then they're playing against HCU the week after that. So they should, I know, Mark, I know that we've seen this before, with Nebraska, like getting off to a great start in terms of their non-conference. The possibility, I mean, they do play Michigan, but they get them at home. They don't have to play Ohio State. Probably, when it comes to like the traditional big powers that, at the end of the season, they go to Penn State. So my long-winded answer to your question is the possibility of Nebraska, depending on the maturation process of Dylan Raiola and an off season with Dana Holgorsen firmly entrenched as the offensive coordinator. I'm not going to go out so far on that limb to say, oh, this is a playoff team, but Nebraska could make some noise within the Big Ten. I think I applaud Matt Rule saying, okay, this is the last time I want this program or the fans to be excited about 6 wins. Like that would be my logical next step, is that with a good off season, barring injury, barring like too many more radical transfer portal defections, this is a program that's ready to move into the next step or tier within the Big Ten in 2025.
Yeah, I could totally see them winning 8 or 9 games next year in the regular season. And that might not excite a lot of the old school Nebraska fans, and I get that, but like, gosh, like baby steps here. Like,
oh yeah,
it's been like 20 years of like real disappointment. And so like I think you've got the infrastructure in place now. I think NIL is going to be a net positive for Nebraska with their resources. And so once Matt Rule can continue to show a little bit more proof of concept, that'll just increase recruiting and transfer portal additions, and again, everything else that goes with that. So I'm gonna go short of like calling them like next year's Indiana, because like Indiana's
right,
a playoff team this year,
correct.
but they could be that type of team in the Big Ten next year. It's like the surprise team of the Big Ten where everyone's like, oh boy, they won like 9 games this year. I don't know if I saw that coming. So I could totally see that. Last bowl game, I think we have to briefly hit on the Sun Bowl. Washington, Louisville, great game. Came down to the last, basically came down to the very end.
That's why I was like that.
Yeah,
Like that is like the complete opposite of Kirk Ferentz. Like, okay, let's
yep.
go for the win. Let's go. Let's
finish this.
Let's finish this, and say what you will about Washington's first year in the Big Ten. They'll be able to look back at this and just kind of, I would just think collectively be like, oh, all right,
we made it.
We made it. It wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always what we wanted, but for them to have made the transition to not only a completely different conference, but with a completely different coaching staff that, it was around this time last year. I mean, not even this time last year. It was, well after the fact, because like they were, the Washington staff there is now down in Alabama. It's like, it was like they were the Washington players that were there, huge exodus, not only to the NFL, but with like the transfer portal, all that kind of stuff. So I think Washington, the record didn't reflect it, but I would just, like I said, it's like, okay, we made it. Now we've got something to build on. No, we didn't win our bowl game, but now we kind of have had we've had a year of exposure within the Big Ten. We've shown that we can compete. Now all we have to do is just build upon what we have here, as well as like get our players further acclimated into the way that we want to do them versus what the previous coaching staff wanted.
Yeah, just a crazy year. Like Washington was like the middle-aged man who got divorced, had to like buy a new house in a new city take a new job. And they've found a place to live that they feel happy about. They're getting settled into their new job. They're ready to start dating again. Like, what a year. And so like I think this next year is going to be really important for them, because like everyone's going to give them a pass for like anything happened the last 12 months. So you replace your coaching staff, like you lost more talent to the NFL draft last year than probably you've ever lost in a single draft, maybe in the history of the program. Like they lost so many guys, and it's not like everyone's like, oh, like Penix and Odunze, like you lost Rosengarten, you lost Jalen McMillan, like they lost so much talent. Jalen Polk, they lost so much talent to the NFL. You switched conferences, you lost like so much happened. And so I think next year will give us just a better sense of like, okay, where is this program right now?
Right.
Is this the right coaching staff? Is this a team that's going to get back to being, a 9-10 win type of team? Is 6 and 7 win seasons going to be the new reality? Like there's a lot of questions to be answered about Washington that I don't think were fair to ask this year, that will be fair to ask next year.
And let's not forget that, I mean, they've already had some turnover within their coaching staff. Like Steve Belichick is going to follow his father down to North Carolina. As of today, Ryan Walters, the former Purdue head coach, is now heading up Washington's defense. And I mean, it remains to be, I mean, he did a good job when he was at Illinois under Bielema. So I would not presume that he's going to have, like that he's not going to do well, but it's also fair to say, all right, there's an adjustment period, like for not only Ryan Walters going out to the West Coast, but also the players that are going to be there. We talk about like the transfer portal and, with recruiting, all the different things that comprise a team and getting the team chemistry right. I think Jedd Fisch is a good coach. He proved it, what he did at Arizona. But I think it's fair to say that in year 2, especially, let's not forget, Washington, they have Ohio State coming there in September. They also have to go to Michigan, and that was one of their signature wins in this inaugural Big Ten season. So it's going to be, like you said, it's all right. Are they going to have to kind of get used to the fact that 7, 8, 6, 7, 8 wins? Is that kind of is that our ceiling? Can we get back to national championship contenders? Because Washington, that's a program that is used to contending for national championships. They did it not just this past year, but several years ago in the Don James era. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting year in 2025 for Washington.
Yeah, so that's one team I think we'll be paying close attention to this offseason and just kind of seeing the arc there. Let's get into the playoffs.
Oh yeah,
SEC. Let's talk Notre Dame, Georgia first. I'm just
okay
with this.
Okay.
How far has the SEC fallen when the clock's running out on a game that you're losing by 2 touchdowns to a team that hasn't won this type of game in 30 some years, probably?
Yep.
And your announcer, and I say your announcer because he's your announcer, is ESPN. It's on ESPN. They've got your TV rights as a conference, is showing clips from like a scoreless game in the first quarter where the walk-on gets in the ref's way and draws a penalty and takes 0 points off the board, by the way. And you're getting the ball at the 25 instead of the 10. Oh goodness. That was the difference between not being able to punch it in, apparently. And you've got him just reaching, I'm trying to reach for any excuse I can find. Injuries and depth, and the walk-on hit the ref and it cost him a touchdown that you had 50 minutes to recover from, and it didn't actually even cost you a touchdown because you didn't score on the play anyway. You still could have scored a touchdown. That was like peak. To me, that was the lowest point for the SEC this month, was watching Sean McDonough just what can I hold on? What can I grab onto here to make this palatable?
I was going to say, if anything, I'm sure, with Kirk Herbstreit, the way, he twisted himself into, and I realized, when it comes to, like everything SEC earlier, it's kind of like that old adage of like Sean McDonough's like, hold my beer, like from Kirk Herbstreit, like the way it's bad because it's just, if anything, it reminds me of, and I realize again, we're talking about, like a different kind of set of circumstances. Almost 20 years ago, when Ohio State was blasted by Florida in the BCS championship game, and Michigan was taken apart by USC in the Rose Bowl, and so the Big Ten was down, and Jim Delaney, remember, like kind of had like that infamous, basically like kind of like almost excuse, article about the Big Ten in comparison to the SEC. It's like, don't do this. Like you are, when you're digging a hole, quit digging. You're just making it worse. And Sean McDonough did exactly what you described, with trying to rationalize and excuse the fact that Georgia was just beat by a better team. Granted, I wouldn't say that, offensively that, going into it. And by the way, thank you for the tweet that, you and I, we had predicted Notre Dame would win. It was close. It was the kind of game that I figured it would be. Now, granted, I never saw the way that it was going to turn out, precisely like that. But that was kind of, in the sense that a physical game that, that Marcus Freeman was going to have his team ready to play on defense, especially on special teams, the way that wound up being, so yeah, I think during this offseason, that would be I'll just say a come to Jesus moment for ESPN and the SEC. Like, hey, we're going to have to kind of figure out the way that we position this, because it's just making them look worse every broadcast when they just kind of continue to make excuses and whine about the SEC not being the dominant conference.
And then the punt, so like Kirby didn't seem to be sure if that was legal. The running a punt team, like, check your rule book, Kirby. That's perfectly legal. You were given a chance to substitute. The ref held them for what felt like an eternity while your defense got aligned. Like, how about instead of blaming the walk-on who got a little bit too far toward the field?
That's right.
How about we look at our own team getting hut-hutted on the 18-yard line? On your opponent's 18-yard line, you get hut-hutted. That is high school stuff.
Yes.
Like, that
exactly.
is just awful. Like, you got out-coached for 60 minutes. You got outplayed for 60 minutes. Your league is not nearly as good this year as it has been. And people are just really struggling with that reality. They're just grasping for anything, any excuse they can find as to explain it away so that you don't have to just say, yeah, the narrative was wrong. We shouldn't have got 4 teams in. In fact, maybe we shouldn't have even gotten 3 in. I don't know. Maybe our teams weren't that good this year. There's no way to explain this away anymore. Like, there's just this mountain of evidence now that screams the SEC was not that good this year. That is maybe the worst version of the SEC we've seen in a really long time. Like, maybe a 20-year run. It's maybe the worst version that we've seen of the SEC. And I don't know why. To me, that would be the more palatable thing to say, is be like, look, it's been a good 20-year run. The SEC isn't finished.
No.
Certainly there's still a team in the playoffs. There's a lot of good programs in the league, like, expect to bounce back next year, but this was our worst version of ourselves in 20 years. Why is that so hard to say? It blows my mind.
Like I said, a stubbornness. And again, I think what I'm starting to see on social media is, I don't want to call it excuses, but I think just the reality of the situation of, I think, NIL starting to level out the playing field. The transfer portal, all those things are a factor. And instead of, like you said, trying to blame it on, a walk-on getting in the way of the ref, and, like trying to, say that, oh, this was, in terms of like the punt team, like that was illegal to ship, like to shift players on and off the field. Okay, just it was not it would be more suitable to just say, it was by and large a transitional year. Arguably the greatest coach in our conference and potentially college football history left. And there's kind of a period of upheaval, and a lot of us are still trying to get our footing, and other teams around the country are good. And we were not as good as we have been. And next year we'll be back, and much more, I think acceptable.
Have some dignity, have some like,
yeah.
We're blaming the walk-on in the first, like, early in a game of like a tie game. Like, that's not why you lost.
That's right. You got it.
It's not why you lost. Oh gosh. So that was amazing. But Penn State kicked it off the second round with a pretty convincing win over Boise. I mean, there were some moments of intrigue. I I thought it'd be a little closer than it was, and it did at points tighten up a little bit. Penn State did some dumb stuff, some dumb penalties and some things like that didn't help their cause necessarily. But, ultimately, I think it played out similarly to what we expected. Was like, okay, which team's passing game, quarterback, whatever, can keep the other defense on its heels? And that was Penn State. That was Drew Aller. And they did hold Ashton Jeanty under the 150 mark, which I said was important.
Yes.
They bottled him up really well. He had a couple of really nice runs, but they bottled him up really well. Look, we were 4-0. I mean, like we were 4-0 on these games, so I don't know how much shock we have by anything we saw, but like, I guess, what do you make of Penn State right now? I've been a defender of Penn State's all year. I felt they're better than people are giving them credit for. Some of the stuff they're talking about, like Ole Miss would beat them by 2 touchdowns in Happy Valley if they would have played, hypothetical Ole Miss, another hypothetical SEC thing. But like, they've undoubtedly had an easy path so far.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So what do you make of them in terms of, like, now the real tournament's here? Like, can they win this thing? Like, or
I think they can win it. But I just think that they get in their own way a lot more than I would have anticipated at this stage of the season. And you kind of referred to it with Boise State, like, incidentally, like when we're talking about ESPN, more Louis Riddick, please. I'll take him, every day of the week and twice on Sunday if you're going to give me for ESPN.
Don't hire him, Jets. Don't
please.
Take him from us.
Yeah. But Louis Riddick kind of referred to, like, okay, if I'm James Franklin, I'm telling Andy Kolodnicki, like, let's run the ball, let's pound the rock. That's kind of to your point, Mark. I think they certainly have the talent on with running the ball. Defensively, they're strong. I mean, they're just, I haven't heard, maybe you have, the severity or the significance of Abdul Carter, not playing. But I have every anticipation he will be ready to go against Notre Dame. But now you're going up against another, for the first time, I'll just say so far in this tournament, a physical team that can match you in terms of, all right, you like to run the ball. We have a really good defense. Notre Dame likes to run the ball. They have a good, so that to me is going to be an interesting game. So, because I think by and large, like, say what you will, Marcus Freeman, they don't try to do things that are out of character. And it felt to me that Penn State Boise State game that maybe they felt like that they had it firmly in control, but it certainly seemed like they were kind of doing some things that were unnecessary. And it wasn't until the tail end that all of a sudden that Penn State realized, hey, we can run the ball at will against Boise State. Let's just get out of here with the win and move on to the next round.
Yeah, and I'll dive into this more. Like, we'll do our semis preview here in a few days. But, like, I agree with you on, like, my early instinct with the Notre Dame Penn State game isn't so much like, I actually think Penn State's got more talent than Notre Dame. My question is more so along the lines of Notre Dame, I think maybe more so than any team in the country, although it seems like Ohio State's getting there, which we'll talk about in a minute. But, like, I think Notre Dame more than any other team in the country at least, like, knows who they are.
That's really good.
Like, the Penn State game, and I'm not alone in this. I think one of your buddies even tweeted this. Like, he tweeted exactly what I was thinking at the exact moment I was thinking. It was almost eerie. Watching Penn State refuse to run the ball for large stretches of that game, I did harken back to, like, the Ohio State Northwestern Rose Bowl.
Yes.
And I had a tweet in the first half of that game. Not all of my tweets age well. This one aged really well. I had a tweet early in that game that probably didn't go over very well at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center in Columbus. And I said, every time Ryan Day chooses to not run the football is coaching malpractice. And Trey Sermon went on to run for, unofficially like 1 billion yards. Like
exactly.
It was
right.
like an insane. What was it, like 400 yards? It was
400.
nuts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so like Ohio State got into this thing in the first half where Trey Sermon was cooking, and they just like didn't seem to process what was happening. That Northwestern had no answer for it, and they kept trying to throw the ball in the first half. And I'm like, every time you throw the ball, it is coaching malpractice. That is exactly what I was thinking watching the Penn State Boise State. Like every time Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen aren't touching the football is like coaching malpractice right now. Like, what are you doing? And they eventually figured it out. But like, I feel like Penn State is more prone to those moments than Notre Dame is. And that's going to be an interesting thing for me to kind of digest the next few days as I try and figure out who on earth I'm going to pick in that game. But no question, Penn State's a very talented team. They do a lot of things. When we get out of like the game management, the play call, when we get away like penalties, when we get away from that stuff, which is obviously very important. So I'm not saying we don't look into that, but like they do a lot of other things that you need to do to win a national championship. Like you have a capable quarterback, you have a really good defense that can really get after the opponent's quarterback. You have a really good running game. You do like your receivers, okay, but like you have Tyler Warren, who's a very unique offensive weapon. They do have a lot of ingredients of a national championship team. So I'm not surprised they're here. I thought they've been one of the most underrated teams in the country all year. I don't know why it was so controversial to think that. I think largely due to, their regular season schedule wasn't great. And, James Franklin has a history of, kind of botching things in some big games. So maybe that's part of it. But like my eyeballs were telling me all year, like this team's got a lot of key ingredients that you would want a college football playoff semifinalist type of team to have. So I feel like a little validated right now because they have been pretty dominant. It's not like I think a lot of people expected them to be here once the bracket came out, but they've really dominated. I mean, they've been clearly better than their two opponents so far. So it'll be a fascinating matchup with Notre Dame. A little controversy in the Peach Bowl. Texas survives Arizona State. I was wrong about. Look, I was right that Texas won. But again, much like the Kansas State pick, we kind of backdoored our way into this. This game did not play out the way I thought. I did not think Arizona State would be competitive. I looked like I was going to be right for the first quarter, and then like slowly but surely the game it went from like, oh, Texas is going to absolutely obliterate these guys to, oh, they've stabilized things to, oh, actually here they come. And so it just kind of went in three phases. And, controversial non-call on the targeting. Yeah, Chip, just your thoughts on that. That's really the story of that game.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, highly enjoyable game. Like you said, it started out, I thought, okay, this is going to be, just all we're doing is giving the critics, like more, fodder, like if Arizona State gets blown out, which is where, I mean, it was going that way. And then Arizona State fought back. And personally, my frustration is, and I'm not one of these people that wants the refs to take over the game, but the frustration when it comes to targeting, it's like, as an Ohio State fan, the inconsistencies of it all. And when you had the aforementioned ESPN announcers basically saying that certainly seemed like targeting when they had their referee say, yeah, that seemed like targeting, and then not for it to be called. That I can see the exasperation of the situation. If you were Kenny Dillingham and, the rolling of the eyes was completely justified, in my opinion, like, okay, now Arizona State still had opportunities to win the game.
They had a 4th and 13 for Texas. They let them off
right.
the hook on.
Exactly. So I kind of look at it like there just needs to be, in the grand scheme of things, not Texas, Arizona State Peach Bowl, but just in the grand scheme, there has to be a better way of determining what targeting is than what college football fans have experienced ever since this rule has been implemented. I don't know. I've been a big proponent of some kind of almost like mirroring what is done in international soccer with like the whole like kind of the yellow card, red card kind of thing, something, because it's just what is the inconsistencies of it all is what is so maddening to, I think, the college football universe at large, that nobody knows like when you believe it's going to be called, when it isn't called. So that to me is kind of where I come down, is like that needs to be one of the major things that needs to be addressed this offseason.
Yeah, like no question. Like your soccer analogy is interesting. I've kind of been the basketball flagrant 1, flagrant 2.
There you go. Okay, that's
like,
yeah.
Either
that's
way,
fine.
like no, as you talk out the soccer thing, I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting because like the yellow cards build up and like the red cards carry. Like that's an interesting take on it as well. But yeah, like something needs to change with that. I was so conflicted watching that. It was targeting. Like there's like you cannot look at that play and then read the definition of targeting and think that wasn't targeting.
Exactly.
But I was so conflicted because I was just like, oh, we've had this great game, this great comeback.
Right.
And now, no matter what, there's going to be like this black cloud over the game of like, Arizona State's going to win because of a targeting call, or they're going to lose because of not calling it target. Like it just like, I was like, oh, this sucks. So I was very conflicted there in terms of what I wanted to happen, but in terms of the actual play, it was, clearly targeting. Arizona State still should have won the game, but you do wonder, like, what if Arizona State had won that game? We talk about how bad this has been for the SEC the last few weeks. What if Arizona State had won that game and the Final Four is Ohio State, Arizona State, Penn State, Notre Dame, not an SEC school to be found. Quinn Ewers saved the SEC essentially.
Well,
in the final minutes and overtime of that game.
Let's not forget that was a previous Big 12 team that migrated to the SEC. That the SEC they were going to be murdered in the SEC. Now, granted, their longtime rival Oklahoma had a very mediocre SEC debut, but yeah, like for SEC fans to be, if you had said at the beginning of the season, all of your hopes and dreams are going to be pinned to Texas going into the college football playoff, you might have said Texas is going to be in the playoff, but you're down to your last hope is going to be on the Longhorns. Nobody would have suspected that.
Your last hope just to have a semifinalist represented.
That's right. That's right. You got it.
So yeah, that's all very interesting. And then of course, Ohio State, Oregon, obviously this is a Big Ten podcast, and that was the game, not only for the Big Ten, that was the game of the week in terms of just the build up and everything. I was surprised what Ohio State did to Tennessee. I was stunned what Ohio State did to Oregon.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That was, if you had taken like an alien or just like even someone, maybe someone, not even an alien, maybe someone who knows football, but someone like an astronaut went to outer space this fall and like didn't get to watch any college football. And they came home and the only game they've watched was the Ohio State Oregon Rose Bowl. And at halftime of that game, if you would have told them, hey, these two teams played each other 2 months ago and Oregon won by a point, they would have thought you were insane. Mm-hmm. Because from about the 30-second mark of that game, they didn't have a prayer of winning. That game was over.
Yeah.
That game was over as fast as any big game I have ever seen in my life. Like, even we've seen some big blowouts. Even Ohio State's been on the wrong end of them. Like, we've seen Ohio State with like Alabama a couple of years ago and with Florida a few years ago, those games weren't over this fast. Like this game was over and you knew it like right away. Like you knew it, like some people are saying the Ibuka catch, like to go up 14. For me, it was Jeremiah Smith going like 50 yards on a little dump. I'm like, oh boy, this is not good. Like the way they started, I was like, this is going to be, I didn't want to be a prisoner of the moment, but like, this is going to be like Ohio State's A game is being played. They've brought their A game, and I don't know if Oregon's going to be ready for this.
Well, two things come to mind is because I completely agree with you. I mean, that game was over. I mean, almost as soon as it began, is first and foremost. I mean, like I realized completely different set of, in terms of environment, but I felt like this was by and large, it reminded me so much of the 2014 Big Ten, like Ohio State. Now that was something to prove, like that was to get into the playoff. That was Urban Meyer. I've heard him in interviews. I'm sure that you have. Okay, we knew going into that we, because earlier in the day with everything that had happened, with the Big 12, it's like, okay, we need to show that we belong, and that's basically Ohio State was bound and determined to prove that. They did. So that was kind of like, okay, no disrespect to that Ohio State team or that Wisconsin team, but this Oregon team, the talent level of, like that Ohio State faced against Wisconsin versus Oregon. I mean, Oregon was high. I mean, the amount of NFL draft talent on this team, super high. The second thing, and this is kind of just to kind of piggyback off something you said earlier about Notre Dame being a team that knows who they are, and probably Ohio State is finally being that team that, now granted, I would love to be able to find out what was said in that supposedly very heated player coach meeting in the aftermath of, because whatever it is that was said, and because it's like Ohio State fans are the beneficiaries of, and obviously the coaches and players, but whatever was said during that meeting, Ohio State,
bottle that up.
Oh my gosh. And you got two more games to go. Because I mean I think it's going to be interesting to see if Ohio State can keep that level of intensity over the next two games.
That's going to be the challenge here, because just a total 180 in public perception of this team. They enter the playoff. People are doubting them. People are doubting if Ryan Day is even going to be the coach.
Right.
They're going to lose to Tennessee. Are they going to fire Ryan Day when they lose to Tennessee? And so everyone was kind of writing them off, making fun of them, cracking jokes about the Michigan game. Now everyone's telling them like, oh, you're unstoppable. Like you can't, right. No one left is going to be able to stay on the field with you, let alone beat you. How do you mentally, like, you've got to keep that edge. You've got to keep that underdog, backs against the wall, world doesn't believe in us mentality. But it's a lot harder to do that than when the world is actually against you and the backs are against it. Like now it's like, oh, you're great. You're amazing. This is Ohio State's challenge, because they are, in my opinion, way better than anybody that's left.
Right.
But they're also capable of losing to any of those three teams. So I don't know how that is like that's their big challenge right now. It's the rat poison, as Nick Saban would say.
Yes.
Now, luckily, it's not like a 40-day rat poison like they got against Florida back in the day, where they were told how they were going to dominate Florida for like a month and a half until the game was actually played. This is going to be a little bit shorter of a turnaround, and maybe that's the key. Maybe that's the recipe, is this is going to be a short turnaround. It's going to be kind of a normal game week, essentially, that's how right. It plays out, basically. Like an extra day and a half. But maybe that's just what it is. And like you're flying from place to place and you don't really have time to feel like you're invincible. Like you don't have time to like reflect on everything yet. And maybe that's the key for Ohio State here.
And let's not forget, and I know that we're going to, preview game in greater detail next week. In a matter of speaking, that this game against Texas in the Cotton Bowl is kind of almost like, okay, Ohio State being the visiting team. I realize Ohio State fans are phenomenal at traveling for the bowl games, but the fact that it's going to be in Texas, Ohio State, that's something. Maybe I'm grasping at straws here, but that might be something that like Ohio State can kind of be like, okay, we're going into basically like a home game for Texas and use that to their advantage. But yeah, it's going to be crucial for the coaching staff to try and maintain that razor sharp edge that has been on full display for the last two games against Tennessee and against Oregon.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question Texas is going to have a very, 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 very skewed to their favor percentage of the fans in that stadium.
Yes.
Ohio State fans travel amazingly well, but here's the thing: like, if you're an Ohio State fan and you've got a limited amount of resources to travel to follow this team, you're either going to the Rose Bowl last week, or you're rolling the dice and being like, I'm saving my resources for a hypothetical national championship game in Atlanta, which is a pretty easy trip to make from Columbus. So I think this is the game that like gets skipped by Ohio State fans. Again, you can't expect these people to put in thousands of dollars for 3 straight weeks. I mean, the first game was a home game, but 3 straight weeks of this, you just can't expect the normal Ohio State fan to do that. So if they're kind of rationing out whatever you want to call it, their resources, they either use them on the Rose Bowl for the rematch against Oregon, or they're using them, I think, to save for Atlanta in the event that that's something that happens. So, no, I agree. God, how good is Jeremiah Smith? I've said it on the show already. Like, I've watched him 3 years longer than most of the rest of college football world. Like,
yes,
most people don't follow recruiting, or certainly don't follow it to the level where like they're actively watching Jeremiah Smith as a sophomore in high school play football games, do camps, do 7-on-7s, everything else I got to see him do. Like, and he still shocks me. It is unbelievable. I have never, ever seen a freshman wide receiver this good, ever. Like Larry Fitzgerald was amazing. Julio Jones, like I have never seen a freshman wide receiver this good.
Well, again, I appreciate all of the hard work that you and Kevin Noon, in terms of like the education of fans such as myself about on the recruiting efforts. I freely admit it's not necessarily that I'm not a pessimist by nature. It's more of, I am more of a, I'll just say a healthy skeptic in terms of when it comes to, all right, recruiting. I recognize the value and the importance, and appreciate the rankings, but until the player is on campus and competing against players just as good or possibly better, that I kind of withhold my thoughts in terms of, all right, let's not get on the hype train yet. The fact that last winter and spring, people such as yourself that had seen him in high school, as well as like people that were seeing him for the first time, and you were hearing the whispers and murmurings about, this guy is legit. The fact that like the Big Ten Network during the spring game kind of made a point to kind of emphasize this got me excited. And I think if anything, I kind of feel like, all right, like you said, I'm continually amazed and surprised what I see every time he goes out there, because I'm thinking, all right, as a defensive coordinator, I'm going to be able to do something to slow him down. And I'm not seeing anything at all. So, I mean, I'm just savoring every opportunity I have to see him play, because I realize that the next couple of years are going to go fast. And, it's when they talk about generational talent, I know that that's thrown around a lot when it comes to, players, but, Jeremiah Smith is definitely, he fits that definition for me.
It was funny because like, I'm usually like, I know there's a lot of hyperbole in like the recruiting world. I try and stay away from that as much as I can. But like I said, before he arrived in Columbus, I'm like, he's going to start as a freshman. And that was kind of seen as a little bit, of hyperbole. It was seen as, almost a little reckless for me to say that before he'd even set foot on campus. And I knew that. And what people didn't realize was I was actually dialing it back because I had a pretty good inclination he was going to do something. Now, I didn't think he'd be this is like just beyond, but like I had a pretty good inclination he was going to be the best freshman Ohio State's had in probably since Andy Katzenmoyer. And then like I'm saying the same things. Like he gets to Columbus and they're doing their winter workouts and like they're not getting coached in football scenarios, but the players are going out there and throwing the ball around. The players can go out there and kind of police themselves and go through things. And people are still asking me like, well, you still think he's going to start? And I was like pretty calm about it. I was like, yeah, I'm going to stick by that. And again, I was dialing it back because I had someone tell me like 2 weeks, he had been on campus like 2 weeks. And I had someone tell me, you might not believe this. And I'm like, I probably will, but go ahead. He's the best wide receiver on this team right now. Like he's better than Emeka Egbuka right now. We haven't even had a practice yet. He's better than Emeka Egbuka. And I didn't share that with anybody because I was already out there on the island, not on an island, but like I was already out there with like hyperbole of like, he's going to start, guys. Like you're not keeping out of the starting lineup. I know like Brandon Ennis is back and wants a role. And I know Carnell Tate's back and I know what Emeka Egbuka is. Like they're not going to bring him off the bench. And he's going to have an unbelievable freshman year. So I already knew, like, I was already like so invested in it. It's like, why even throw more fuel on the fire or whatever? But like, it was so glaringly obvious before they'd even practiced that he was the best receiver on their team. Like the best player on their offense, the best player. Like basically I had someone tell me like going into spring ball, like the two best players, and one of them was easy. We already knew that. We didn't need to see anything. Like the two best players on this roster are Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. That's the fever pitch it got to before like spring ball was even starting.
I'm sure you've heard this, like game respects game. That, by and large, I referenced the Big Ten Network, the spring game. It's a compliment to all of the players, but also, to Brian Hartline, is that for Jeremiah Smith to come in and demonstrate from the onset that he was worthy of starting. And it's not like he was walking into a room devoid of talent. Like, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, they're all talented individuals. And for Jeremiah Smith to, like you said, kind of, go to the front of the pack, so to speak, the fact that, like the egos and, that everyone was able to acknowledge that, I think speaks volumes about, the caliber of, of individuals that Ohio State has recruited. So as I said, I'm blown away every time I see him play. And then I'm always in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, savor it, because the likes of him, don't come around every year. I like what, Kevin Noon, said, it's like, you're not going to, don't want to put this out on, like the upcoming recruits that are verbally committed to Ohio State. Like, you can't compare, Jeremiah Smith, and say like, oh, he's going to be, no, he is the Jeremiah Smith, and savor and enjoy what you have right now, because it's not going to come around that often, if ever again.
Yeah, going to be an insanely unreasonable bar that is being set now, where every future Ohio State 5-star receiver they sign is going to be like, well, how's he going to compare to Jeremiah Smith? He's not.
Right.
Not.
That's well, Oregon. Like I saw,
Corian Moore is going to Oregon.
They're trying to. They're
like I've seen Corian. He's special. He's not going to do what Jeremiah Smith did this year, and he is very, very special. He's going to be a very good player.
And to put that burden on him is unfair, because it's like, well, why aren't you? Because I thought you were supposed to be, and it's like, well,
you're
no,
both 5 stars. You were both like ranked in the top couple players in the country. It's like that's what I say. Not all 5 stars are equal. Not all number 1 overall players are equal.
That's right. Well, the fact that I mean, like, you have NFL draft analysts saying if he could go to the NFL now, he would be. It's not a possibly, like, no, he would be the number 1 draft choice overall if allowed to do so.
Assuming a 3 wide receiver set, because that's pretty much the base for just about every NFL team at this point. Assuming a 3 wide receiver set, there's not an NFL team he doesn't start for today.
Correct. That's correct.
And I'll say this now. It's easy for me to say this now in hindsight, because to say it in real time would have almost been suicidal. His sophomore year at Chaminade Madonna, I think he probably could have started at Ohio State.
See, I mean, that again, because I have to defer to you, because you saw
an alien, such an alien. Like, that's like, he's not that much different physically. Like, obviously, like the route run, there's so much growth he's had since his sophomore year in high school. But just the physical component, it's not like he's put on 50 pounds. Like, since he was like, he's maybe 10 pounds heavier than he was as a sophomore in high school at this point. Like, he was 6'3", 200 pounds a sophomore year of high school, was a track star. Like, he could have walked on any college campus in America as a sophomore in high school and started. I've never in my life seen anything like that. It's probably the only thing similar. I wasn't old enough to see. I was old enough to watch him in college and in the NFL, and it was special. But like, I wasn't able to like contextualize it really, or I certainly wasn't able to watch him in high school and contextualize it. It had to be like what Randy Moss looked like, except like Jeremiah is like probably 20 pounds heavier and stronger than Randy was at the same point. Like, like it had to be like what seeing Randy Moss was like. That's the only thing I can think of. But yeah, it's nuts. On the Oregon end of this, you went 13-0. You got the 1 seed. You got a terrible draw, and this happens to you, and your season's over, and your fans are like, none of this was worth it, and this is all ruined. I have to think this is the beginning of a Alabama-Georgia type of rivalry where they're not like, and now they're closer geographically, much closer, obviously, but it's a rivalry that was really born more, not so much out of geography, was born more out of like, this is the team we have to get through every year if we want to win a national championship, and probably a conference championship, but certainly a national championship. But yet they're in our own conference. This is the beginnings of that to me. I think Dan Lanning is going to have Oregon in this conversation basically every year moving forward.
Oh, easily. I mean, if anything, it's going to be Ohio State emphatically won this round. It's going to be the kind of thing where, all right, Oregon, making sure that, all right, that they take the lessons that they've learned from this. And, again, with your recruiting expertise, the talent that's coming in, when you look at Oregon's schedule next year, I mean, like Oregon, I freely admit, will be my preseason pick to win the Big Ten next year. And I understand that there's a lot of hurt feelings, and it's like, okay, like, look what Ohio State did to us again in the Rose Bowl, and, and on the national stage and all. Hey, if you're Oregon, I realize that there's a lot of disappointment, but I'd be excited. I really would be, about what's coming, because the talent that is, you're going to be losing a lot of talent to the NFL. Guess what? A lot of talent coming in. I think at quarterback, it's going to be interesting to see how they replace Dylan Gabriel. But as well as I do, Dante Moore is a guy that Ohio State would have loved to have had. So it's not as though like, okay, that, that the well is going to be running dry in Oregon. I think Oregon, disappointing, but Oregon's going to be back, and if anything, they're going to be a player on the national scene for years to come.
First thought is like Oregon fans, like there are only 3 or 4 programs right now that I can look at and definitively say this program is going to be a very, very, very serious part of the national championship discussion every year for the next 5 years. I mean, the list to me is like Ohio State, Oregon, and Georgia.
Okay.
I'm not saying other schools can't get into that. Maybe Texas gets into that. Maybe, I mean, we don't know what Alabama's going to do. I like Kalen DeBoer. It's an interesting marriage to me, but I like him. But they didn't make the playoff this year. Like, what are the schools, like, what are the programs and setups right now? You're hanging your hat, like, every year for the next 5 years, they're going to have something to say about the national championship race. Like, those are the 3 for me.
Yeah, because let's face it, Miami is throwing their money around, but the results, they haven't made the playoffs. We've talked previously about, okay, the frustration that USC has to have. Penn State, it's one of these things where it's like, all right, yeah, I think James Franklin is a good coach, but I mean, let's face it.
They had a lot of things broke their way a lot this year with the conference schedule, with the bracket.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's to me is a wait and see if they can replicate this year over year.
Notre Dame is, I think, for the first time, since, let's face it, I'm not going to include the Charlie Weiss era. I'm going to say for the first time since Lou Holtz, that like Notre Dame is back there. I mean, it's easier to, I don't want to say easier, but when you're talking about, making that climb up the mountain, and staying on top of the mountain, 2 different things. So I agree with you. I think that would be fair to say that Ohio State, just in terms of tradition, as well as, like the resources,
they're here every year.
Yeah. And Georgia, all that. Mm-hmm. And then Oregon, in terms of like with what they're doing on the NIL front and their recruiting. Yeah. I think that those 3 are definitely, and I would say probably Texas is the next one that it's kind of
very close.
Very close.
We'll find out more in about a week.
Yeah.
We'll find out a little more about on them in about a week. But yeah. And then the other thing is, like, Oregon and Ohio State aren't scheduled to play next year. Put me down right now. They're going to play next year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean,
championship. They may play twice. They may not be on the regular season schedule and play twice next year, as a matter of fact. But they're going to play next year.
I think. I mean, for all of the talk about Ohio State, and
Mike Vrabel versus Dan Lanning.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how Ohio State, with the veterans that are leaving, but the talent coming up, they'll be ready.
Yeah. They're going to play again next year, and it's going to be special when they play. It's going to be, everyone's going to talk about like the blowout in the Rose Bowl and what that's going to mean and motivation and everything else. But it's like, these are how, like, you can't force rivalries.
No.
Like, you can't just, these 2 teams should be rivals, so let's just make them be rivals. Like, you can't do that. What has to happen is 2 teams have to consistently play high stakes games, and both sides have to take something from the other side at some point and hurt the other side at some point. Oregon hurt Ohio State this year. They put them on the ropes. They put their program on the ropes a little bit. My gosh, people wanted Ryan Day fired. Some people still want him fired. I don't know, but like, they made Ohio State fans and Ohio State itself kind of question everything they were doing. They also, now Michigan had some hand in this too, but they also cost them a Big Ten championship. That was something that Ohio State desperately wanted to win at the beginning of the year. And that loss to Oregon kind of, helped ensure that wasn't going to happen. And then, of course, now Ohio State has taken a national championship opportunity from Oregon. So you have to take something from each other to have a rivalry. And I think they're going to continue taking things from each other. And I think regardless what the Big Ten regular season schedules say, just like regardless what the SEC regular season schedules would say, Georgia and Alabama always seem to end up playing each other no matter what, sometimes twice. Ohio State and Oregon are always going to be playing each other no matter what, sometimes twice. I just think that's what we're set up for at least the next 5 years, as long as Ryan Day and Dan Lanning are in place. So,
yeah,
we'll see. All right, we'll be back in a few days. We will talk. We'll do a portal update. I know we've kind of been talking about when to do the portal update, but there's been so much other stuff going on. We'll do a portal update for the Big Ten because there has been a lot of movement, and we'll preview the semis coming up next week, next Thursday night and Friday night. So,
and let's not forget we've got the Duke's Mayo Bowl.
That's right. We are desperately hoping for PJ Fleck to get the Mayo bath afterwards. What could possibly be better than that?
That's right.
Yes. So we will talk about that as well. But this is a long one, but we had a lot of ground to cover.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I think we successfully did that. But yes, I hope everyone had a good New Year, good holiday, stayed safe, had some good food, watched a whole bunch of football. I loved it. Just football
Absolutely.
Constantly on the television. It's great time. So appreciate everyone watching and listening, and we'll see you back here in a few days to talk about the semis.
Take care.